The products that turned into GMO were historically great sources of copper. Not so much anymore. Corn, soybean, beets, alfalfa, all of these really rich sources of copper have been excised from our diet. And this is something that if people get nothing out of this conversation, I want them to remember this one fact. A very important research team in University of Wisconsin in Madison, headed up by Dr. Hart, in 1928, they were able to establish the fact that an animal that is denied copper in its diet will accumulate iron in its liver. It's biological. It's axiomatic. It's not like, well, it's Tuesday, maybe there's a little bit of iron going. No, it's always going to, a low copper diet will yield a high iron animal. And when the liver gets too much iron, it's going to affect 500 enzymes. And it's a very profound scientific issue that is not taught anywhere. And I can assure you that most people are eating a low copper diet.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. What if the root of many of our illnesses and diseases was simply mineral deficiencies? This is episode 343, and our guest today is Morley Robbins. Morley is the author of Cure Your Fatigue and the creator and founder of the Root Cause Protocol and the Magnesium Advocacy Group. Today, he addresses the elephant in the room, why so many of us are sick and tired. And in the title of his book, Cure Your Fatigue, there's a little bit of a play on the elements because Cu is the symbol for copper on the periodic table. And the answer, according to Morley, as to why we're so sick and tired, is simple and related to mineral deficiencies that are the cause of metabolic dysfunction. After decades of research, Morley has come to understand that magnesium in particular plays a role in all metabolic systems, and it's therefore a contributing factor to nearly all major health issues, that is, magnesium deficiency. It is the common thread for millions of Americans who are dealing with heart disease, diabetes, obesity, osteoporosis, cancer, general fatigue, and any chronic condition born out of inflammation. Today, Morley explains how to achieve the proper balance of core minerals, copper, iron, and magnesium, that work synergistically to maintain the body's balance and well-being. And he goes over how to incorporate them into the diet so that we can absorb these critical nutrients and improve our health. Before we get into the conversation, I want to let you know that the Weston A. Price Foundation is teaming up with Children's Health Defense to provide resources to educate your family, friends, and neighbors about the risks of COVID injections for children. Go to the link in our show note description to see postcards and flyers that educate about the problem with vaccine and other medical mandates. Together, we can overcome censorship, build relationships, and highlight key issues that the government and scientific community have overlooked. It's also important to raise questions and demand answers. Find the resources you need at children'shealthdefense.org/child-health-topics/health-freedom, or just use the link in the show description, as I mentioned. And thank you in advance for your partnership in this quest. And this podcast is sponsored in part by Optimal Carnivore. Organ meats are some of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. The founders of Optimal Carnivore understand the amazing benefits of eating organ meats, but they found it difficult to source a variety of high-quality organ meats. Plus, they dislike the process of preparing them and trying to make them tasty. So, they started sourcing 100% grass-fed organ meats from New Zealand. They freeze-dry the organs and encapsulate them into convenient bovine gelatin capsules. They chose New Zealand because it is a pure source, a pristine land with rich soil, lush greenery, and one of the cleanest environments on Earth. And they freeze-dry the organs to preserve all the vitamins, minerals, proteins, and enzymes. The products are 100% grass-fed and grass-finished and free of hormones, pesticides, antibiotics, and GMOs. Our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal too. So Optimal Carnivore created this unique blend of 9 different organs, a powerful combination including beef liver, brain, thymus, heart, kidney, spleen, pancreas, lung, and gallbladder. It's their grass-fed organ complex, and it is a real nose-to-tail solution. Each organ contains its own unique benefits and nutritional profile, and it provides a large range of nutrients that support all the major organs and glands. Optimal Carnivore believes everyone deserves easy access to the most nutrient-dense food on the planet, and they want to take the guesswork and hassle out of eating organ meat. So check out their supplements. They're perfect for taking whether you're on the go or just trying to develop an appreciation for organ meats. They have a grass-fed organ complex, as I mentioned earlier, a grass-fed bone marrow, and a grass-fed liver product. Go to Amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code Weston10 to save 10% on all products. Oh, and a side note, the Optimal Carnivore folks also plant one tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. So go to Amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code Weston10 to save 10% on all products. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Morley.
Well, thanks for the invite. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
I have heard you say that you have information that was never taught in medical school. How can you be so sure?
Well, I've talked to a lot of doctors, and they've assured me that they did not learn this. A lot of people are familiar with the book that then became the movie, The Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the other is, J.K. Rowling's whole series. And
Harry Potter
series. And what's the one thing we can't talk about? It's Voldemort, right? Well, Voldemort in medical school is copper, that which cannot be named. First of all, they don't talk about minerals in any kind of doctor school. That's not taught anywhere. And if people knew how little their doctors knew about mineral metabolism, oxygen metabolism, and energy metabolism, they'd run the other way. And so it's just, as I've gotten into the research, and I'm now 11 years in, and I spend 2 to 3 hours a day, every morning, reading peer-reviewed scientific literature. So I've read probably 5,000 or 6,000 articles now. And that's more than 5,000 or 6,000 doctors you've met. They don't read. The other thing that surprised me was that God love doctors. They're great. They're wonderful people. They have the hearts of gold, but they don't have time to research. They do what they were trained. And the real problem is they've confused their training with the truth, and they're not the same.
So you were a pre-med student at one time. What was the focus on in medical school, if not the things you're discussing?
It's doing deep dives into science, into chemistry, biochemistry, into physics, and organic chemistry is it's another world. And then you get into the actual professional school, and it's learning. It's just memorization is all it is. Memorizing all these disease states. And the way I characterize it now is a lot of people are familiar with the Bible. We all, regardless of what our background is, we've heard of the Bible. And there's a lot of doom and gloom in the Bible, but there's also a protagonist. There is a protagonist. And we know who that is, and it's been a source of controversy on the planet for a lot of years. But the Bible in conventional healing is called the Merck Manual.
The Merck Manual?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's like 600 pages. It's the go-to reference point for any doctor to look up different conditions. Well, it's all doom and gloom, and there is no protagonist. There's no protagonist in the Merck Manual. And so it turns out that bioavailable copper is the protagonist, but it needs to be bioavailable.
Okay, well, now let's get to it. So why is copper so important?
Great question. We live on a planet with oxygen. 21% of the air we breathe has oxygen. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that we didn't always have oxygen on this planet.
Mm.
When you go back billions of years ago, there was no oxygen. And for some unknown reason, about 2.3 billion years ago, and how the astrobiologists know this, I have no idea, but they do, or at least they're very emphatic about it. There were cyanobacteria, blue bacteria, in the iron ocean back then. It was mostly iron. Iron is the number one number one element on the planet. But the cyanobacteria started to engage in photosynthesis and started to give off oxygen into the air, into the atmosphere. And back then it was a very small amount. But when there was 1% oxygen, today it's 21%, but when it was 1% oxygen, it wiped out 99% of life on planet Earth. And it's called the Great Oxidation Event.
Mm.
And it's a very important part of our history to understand disease. Because if you don't understand oxygen, there's no way you can really solve the problem. And so what's very important to understand is that what came to our rescue was this metal called copper. Because copper and what emerged at that time period, again, billions of years ago, were enzymes called multi-copper oxidases. They're very important because they turn oxygen into water and allow us to release energy in our mitochondria. Can't be here without them. And there are 1,000 different forms of, they're called MCOs. There are 1,000 different forms of MCOs in our gut. That's important to know. Antibiotics are very hard on MCOs, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got a chemical called melatonin. People have heard of it. Well, it goes back to the great oxygen event. Very, very important. It's a very powerful antioxidant. And then we have this little element. It's called, you probably have heard of it, cholesterol.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, right. So cholesterol goes all the way back to the great oxygen event. It's been on the planet for a long time. It's not a source of disease. When it gets rusty, that's when it's a problem. When it gets oxidized, that's when it becomes a real. And how does it get oxidized? Because we have too much iron in our diet. And so it's a very different world when you understand copper metabolism. But what really is central to the story, it's called the blue protein, but its formal name is ceruloplasmin, blue blood. And it's in our blood. It's a soluble form of an enzyme that's in our blood. And it turns out that we do have a blueprint that runs our metabolism. And the blueprint runs on the blue protein. And it's absolutely amazing that our immune system depends on it, our metabolic processes, our mitochondria, because that blue protein is what's delivering copper to the mitochondria.
And that's essential for energy to be made.
Absolutely. So we have 100 trillion cells in our body, give or take a couple hundred, right? So we have 40 quadrillion mitochondria. That's
40 quadrillion?
That's 15 zeros.
Oh my gosh.
So the average cell has 500 mitochondria. But wait, there's more. So the average liver cell has 2,000 mitochondria. The average kidney cell, 4,000 mitochondria. The average heart cell, 10,000 mitochondria. The average egg in a mature woman's body, the average egg has 600,000 mitochondria.
Wow.
And then we get to the brain. And you're sitting down. Is your seatbelt on? People probably have heard of Parkinson's.
Yes.
Well, it involves a part of the brain called the substantia nigra, substantial dark. What's it filled with? It's supposed to be filled with copper. And the neurons in the substantia nigra have 2 million mitochondria. What is the And so what's important for people to understand is that there's a yeast model that's used to study animal mitochondria. And this is the work of Paul Cobain at Auburn University, just an absolute genius. And there's 50,000 atoms of copper in each mitochondria. So take 40 quadrillion times 50,000, and we got a really big number there, right?
Huge.
Huge number. And that's the way we're supposed to be designed, is to have access to that kind of copper in order to run our system. Now, just to put it into perspective, the average person, the average adult, has about 90 to 100 milligrams of copper in their body. The average adult has between 4,000 and 5,000 milligrams of iron. And what's fascinating is that in the field of homeopathy, copper is referred to as the general and iron is referred to as the foot soldier. And so, just like in the military, there are only a few generals, but they call the shots. And what is not understood, it's well documented in the literature, it's painfully documented in the literature, that copper regulates iron all over the science, but it's not taught in doctor school.
Wow.
And so the most accepted explanation for aging is called the free radical theory of aging. And this was originally proposed by Denham Harmon, who was a chemical engineer studying oxidative stress in the industrial setting. And back in the 50s, he decided he wanted to become a doctor. So he had a PhD in engineering, decided to go to medical school. He didn't just go to medical school, he went to Stanford. This guy's really talented. And in 1956, he writes this article called The Free Radical Theory of Aging, which turned allopathic medicine on its ear, because up until that point, it was all about bugs and toxins and all this stuff. And he said, no, it's actually the oxygen molecule that's being mismanaged that's causing this. And there was a lot of, you can imagine the strife around that theory.
Yeah.
But in 1969, it was legitimized when there was research done at Duke University to discover a very important enzyme that also goes back to the great oxygen event. It's called superoxide dismutase. And superoxide is an oxygen molecule with an extra electron.
Mm.
And it's really grumpy about it. And it should be called hyperoxide, but we live in a very funny age, and so we call it superoxide, like it's Superman. It's very destructive. And dismutase is a silly way of saying neutralize. So superoxide dismutase, which is copper dependent, there's 2 atoms of copper, there's an atom of zinc, but it's structural. And so it's what allows us to, again, to exist on this planet. When that enzyme was discovered and written up, it put the free radical theory of aging on the map.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was refined further in 1972. And then at the tender age of 90, Dr. Harman wrote an update in 2006 to the free radical theory of aging. And it's now the most accepted explanation for why we age. And it's very, very simple. The word aging is just another way of saying iron accumulation.
Wow. So this is going to take a minute to sink in for me, and I'm sure the listeners as well, because this is so different from what we've heard before. And you're basically saying that we need to rebalance our minerals and pay more attention to copper, magnesium, and iron than we may have previously thought.
That's a great summary of what the whole focus is. And so a lot of people who do know about minerals, they worry about 82 minerals. You don't need to worry about 82. You just named the 3, magnesium, copper, and iron. And we need more magnesium. We need more bioavailable copper. Again, you got to put that word bioavailable because it's got to be housed in its enzymes to be fully functional. And we need less iron. And the biological rule that a lot of people don't know about is, it's not my theory. This is the work of Dr. Crichton and Douglas Kell and Gutteridge and Hollowell. These are the great iron biologists on the planet. And the accepted model is that we gain 1 milligram of iron every day we're on the planet. So take your age, multiply it times 365, it's going to be a really big number. It's going to be 5. It's going to be 5 digits. And as a woman, you should have about 4,000 milligrams of iron. And that extra iron is what causes the aging process. And what happens is, as we age, we are losing magnesium, we are losing copper as we age, and as we age, we are gaining iron, we are gaining calcium. And where do they crisscross? Around the age of 40. Talk to anyone who's 40 years old and ask them if they had to go get prescriptions for their glasses. A change. And very often they do. And when did the aches and pains start? When we're about 40 years old. And then it's just this gradual breakdown as we go into the grave. And it's absolutely fascinating to watch.
It is fascinating. And so I want to go with you now to what the sources of these minerals are. Where are we getting all that increased iron, for example? And where can we get more of copper and magnesium that we need?
How much time have we had? The iron is everywhere. It's in produce, it's in grains, it's in supplements, it's in the mistakes that are made by practitioners that they think people are anemic when in fact the iron is stuck in the tissue. It's not showing up in the blood. It's the biggest mistake that's made on the planet. There are 2 things that I'm sort of known for in a heretical way. There is no disease. There's no medical disease, but there is metabolic dysfunction caused by mineral dysregulation. But my other stomping ground is there is no anemia of iron deficiency. It's iron dysregulation. Anyone who has low iron in their blood has high iron in their tissue. And I've been able to establish that with hundreds and hundreds of consults with people. So a lot of mistakes are made around iron, and people take iron regularly above and beyond their daily vitamin. They're taking iron. They're not thinking about what it's doing. Then, of course, there's a very insidious axis between sugar and iron. They play off of each other. But the other axis is between, and certainly Sally Fallon is one of the real geniuses on the planet around retinol, but retinol and copper are another axis. And so a lot of people don't know that. Copper is a fat-soluble vitamin. You can't absorb copper unless you have fat in your diet. That's Weston A. Price.
Yeah.
But here's the catch. There's got to be copper in the soil in order to get into the grass. And so when Joel Charlton is talking about being a grass farmer, he's holding up his bouquet of grass. It's teeming with vitamin C, but people don't know that vitamin C has copper at the center of it. And it's teeming with beta-carotene, and people don't know that that's another form of retinol. And the animal who's eating that grass turns that beta-carotene into retinol in their system. It's so important to our physiology. But what's happened is that our ancestors were raised on grass-fed animals that had access to copper and retinol, and now we live in a world that's dominated by iron and sugar. It's a very different world. And so people don't realize that the diet they're eating, here's an example. Everyone's always asked me, what's new, Morley? And I always like to say, well, let's talk about what's enduring. That might be more. And so I do a lot of research back in the 20s and 30s. And I came across a study a few months ago that was looking at 1935, a study in China, and they were looking at a high copper diet. I was surprised it was based in China, but the focus was spinach and pork. And those were the two foods that were high in copper in 1935. Now, what people may be surprised to find out is that the agricultural scientists have been working overtime to turn spinach into an iron product. There's no copper in it anymore. It's been hybridized. And pork, it's like they're eating GMO corn and GMO soy. And so there's, again, the products that turned into GMO were historically great sources of copper. Not so much anymore. Corn, soybean, beets, alfalfa, all of these really rich sources of copper have been excised from our diet. And this is something that if people get nothing out of this conversation, I want them to remember this one fact. A very important research team in University of Wisconsin in Madison, headed up by Dr. Hart, in 1928, they were able to establish the fact that an animal that is denied copper in its diet will accumulate iron in its liver. It's biological. It's axiomatic. It's not like, well, it's Tuesday, maybe there's a little bit of iron going. No, it's always going to, a low copper diet will yield a high iron animal. And when the liver gets too much iron, it's going to affect 500 enzymes. And it's a very profound scientific issue that is not taught anywhere. And I can assure you that most people are eating a low copper diet. How do we know this? Because it's been proven in the research that there's been an 80% loss of copper on the farm going back 80 years. And so nobody talks about it. It's sort of hush-hush. We're not supposed to know this. And the world is very different today than it was during Dr. Price's day.
Mm-hmm.
If I could wave a magic wand and go back to 1920, I'd like to whisper in his ear and in his wife's ear and say, could you look at the minerals too? Because I think he would have found that it was a high copper diet in addition to a high retinol diet.
Well, let me just interject that our Wise Traditions principle number 3 has to do with nutrient density. And I think Dr. Price did analyze not only the water-soluble and fat-soluble vitamins, but some minerals as well. Perhaps he could have spent a little more time on that, but may he rest in peace. We're still grateful for all that he did.
He's one of my all-time heroes.
Coming up, Morley describes several success stories of people regaining their health through proper mineral balancing, and he shows us how to consume more bioavailable copper.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
This podcast is sponsored in part by BetterHelp. Is there something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? I feel like it's always helpful to talk through issues with an objective third-party counselor or therapist. Well, BetterHelp will assess your needs, match you with your own licensed professional therapist, and you can start communicating within 48 hours. Now, take note, it's not a crisis line, it's not self-help, it is professional therapy done securely online. There is a broad range of expertise in BetterHelp's 20,000 plus therapist network, which may not be locally available in many areas. The service is available for clients worldwide, and you can log into your account anytime and send a message to your therapist. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses, plus you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions, so you won't ever have to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room as you would with traditional therapy. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, so they make it easy and free to change therapists if needed. It's more affordable than traditional offline therapy, and financial aid is available too. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. So visit betterhelp.com/wisetraditions. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, and join the over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. And they offer a special offer for Wise Traditions listeners. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/wisetraditions. And One Earth Health. You already know the benefits of organ meat. But did you know that New Zealand's organ meats are up to 400% more nutrient dense than organ meat from other countries? That means you get a lot more vitamin A, K, and B, along with many other nutrients compared to other sources. Now you can get them in capsule form from One Earth Health. Their cattle are pasture-raised with no GMO or pesticides. Their capsules are filler-free, and each bottle comes with 200 capsules. And all One Earth Health products come with a lifetime warranty. So go to oneearthhealth.com and use the code WISE20 to get 20% off and free shipping. This offer is only for a limited time. So again, hurry because it won't last. Go to oneearthhealth.com and use the code WISE20 for 20% off any One Earth Health product. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. What you're saying resonates with all of us who are part of this regenerative agriculture and slow food movement, because we know a carrot today is different than a carrot 30, 40, 50 years ago. The nutrient content is different. So what you're saying makes sense to me. The question is it too late to reverse? Do you have some stories of folks who have found that right mineral balance and regained their health?
Yeah, thousands. My favorite story is about Chester, 88 years old. He is the grandfather of one of my students, and he was a former college professor, loved to tell jokes, but Chester was getting on in years, and he started to get wobbly, and he actually fell and broke his hip and was put in a nursing home. And the student said, "What have I got to lose?" And so she talked to the staff, and she said, "I'd like to put him on the root cause protocol." They said, "Sure, why not?" And they were very faithful about applying the principles, and she gets a call 11 weeks after they started. And the director of the nursing home said, "What's in this protocol?" And she said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, your grandfather is telling his jokes again, and now he's remembering the punchline." And 11 weeks. And so as time goes on, she was able to engineer a conversation between Chester and Morley. And Chester burst into tears, and I burst into tears, because it was like this very magical moment when he said, "I just want to thank you for getting my life back." And it was very special. But there are many, many stories of people who, unable to get pregnant, now they have a child, people who had all sorts of chronic conditions that now they have their life back. And again, people are always quick to thank me. And I said, "Don't thank me. Thank Mother Nature."
Mm-hmm.
I just stole these principles from her. And we were designed, you'll get a kick out of this. So we're all familiar with farms. And the philosophy of a farm is to recycle, right? It's the overriding thought. We're going to recycle sunlight. We're going to recycle seeds. We're going to recycle soil. We're going to recycle manure, but there's a word that begins with S, but we're not going to say it. But it's all about recycling, right? And so that's been the dominant source of activity on the planet for millennia. And then about 150 years ago, along came this other economic force called the factory. The philosophy of the factory is all about replace. Oh, you need a new TV, you need a new car, you need a new refrigerator. And so we went from recycling to replacing. And it turns out that our body is a mini farm, and we're constantly recycling. The body's always rebuilding, and the experts debate whether it takes 2 years or 7 years. Like, okay, it takes some time to recycle. And it turns out that all of those recycling programs run at the discretion of bioavailable copper. That's not taught anywhere.
The general.
But there's more. The thing is, it turns out that the general is a factory worker and needs to be replaced every day. And our ancestors had access to copper-rich, nutrient-dense, just as you said, lots of vittles in it, and we don't have that today. And so there's just this general erosion of the vitality of our tissue because the cells can't make energy because they don't have enough copper. The cells can't recycle things because they don't have enough copper. The cells can't stop the oxidative stress because the vast majority of all the antioxidant enzymes run on the power of copper. So ferrooxidase, superoxide dismutase, glutathione peroxidase, catalase, peroxidase. These are the big powerhouse antioxidant enzymes in our body, and they all need a copper battery. Do you think that's taught anywhere in doctor school?
No, it doesn't sound like it. And what's interesting to me is, Morley, I know you're part of a magnesium advocacy group. Why isn't there a copper advocacy group?
It's a great question. I backed into this. So that when I started this journey 11 years ago, one of Dr. Liz's clients said, Morley, you should write about what you're reading. And I said, well, like, what do you mean? She said, well, actually, she was a psychologist. She said, I think you should use paradoxical intent. I said, what is that?
Yeah.
She said, it's reverse psychology. And so I did a whole series of articles about let's get fat, how to break bones, let's make a heart attack. And I had a lot of fun with it because I was just reversing everything. And this particular article about let's make a heart attack was a 10-step plan. And 7 of the steps came from the American Heart Association, that what they tell us to do actually causes heart attacks.
Oh, you mean what they tell us to do is the opposite of what we should be doing.
Absolutely. And I was able to prove it in the literature. I had citations. I gave the article to another client of Dr. Liz's, and I said, could you read this and let me know what you think? And she's a practitioner, and she read it. She said, Morley, so this is very clever, and it's very, very good. She said, but I can't help but think that step number 8 isn't more important. And step number 8 was eliminate magnesium from your diet. And so I thought, yeah, maybe she's right. So I went out and I bought Carolyn Dean's book, Magnesium Miracle. And I started reading it. I was hooked from the very first sentence because suddenly I realized why everyone in the hospitals that I'd worked in was so sick. And I started out thinking that it was just a magnesium deficiency. Well, it's not that simple. And my thinking has evolved over the last decade to realize that when you have, again, low bioavailable copper, you have high iron. High iron causes magnesium loss. And that's where the whole mechanism is. And it comes back to those same 3 minerals. And why is retinol so important? Because retinol stops inflammation, but it also makes copper bioavailable. It's what allows it to be loaded in key enzymes.
I can see that this is a very deep topic. I don't know that we can cover it all because I was reviewing your root cause protocol and how to kind of regain the balance among these minerals. And it's quite involved. Has there ever been someone who says to you, this is too much, or you're just crazy, I'm going to go back to what my regular doctor had to say?
That does happen, of course. I mean, people are looking for a simple solution. But what I found is that the people who really want to get well, the thing is, in society, it's probably only about 2 or 3% who really want to take responsibility for themselves. It's not as high as you think it is. It's a much smaller percentage of people. And that's really who this protocol is designed for. That hardcore that really wants to take the reins and work through the process. And there are aspects of it that are incredibly simple. There's a whole series of things to stop doing. And we're very quick to talk about them. And I think a lot of people are always surprised at what we tell people to stop taking, like stop taking vitamin D, stop taking ascorbic acid, stop taking iron supplements, and so on. But we have research to back that up. This isn't just I've got an opinion. It's a compendium of research. And once people get those things out of their routine, they feel better already before they even get to the starts. And then what we've done is design the starts to go in phases, phase 1, 2, and 3, and ease people into this process. Because it's overwhelming for 2 reasons. One, we've been trained to think that there is disease. There is no disease. It just doesn't exist, especially on a planet when you understand oxygen. And so it's having to overcome that mental construct that we've been raised in. And then there is a certain cadence to how you take these minerals during the day so that you get the full benefit of it. And I don't want to imply that it's super complicated, because it's not. But once you understand the principles behind it, people are very easy. And I think the people, especially people who've taken the steps and the time to become pricers, this is a very easy transition. And I think it's important for people to realize that the wisdom and the genius is in nature. We know that. But I think what was missing, in my humble opinion, I don't think there was enough understanding about oxidative stress and how copper and iron are fighting over the oxygen molecule all day long in our body. And once you come to that realization, you see the simplicity of our physiology, but then you see the enormity of it as well. And it's a very important moment when people come to realize, wow, I really can take control of this.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of common ground. You're right. People who listen to this podcast or are part of the Weston Price Foundation understand that our bodies are able to heal themselves, and we don't need to necessarily turn to a so-called expert in the conventional, allopathic medical field so much as rediscover the wisdom that our ancestors had. Maybe Dr. Price didn't spend as much time on the minerals because the people back then didn't have that much oxidative stress because of the copper bioavailability in their diets and so forth. But so let me ask you a couple more questions before we wrap up. One is, where can we find, you might have known this is coming, where can we find more bioavailable copper in our diets today?
Well, there are three sources that we really focus on in the protocol. Bee pollen, again, locally grown, obviously with organic farmers and things. And I'm aware of the GMO crisis there as well. But you can't pollinate a flower and you can't pollinate an animal without copper. And what is in bee pollen is very rich sources of B vitamins, and there's going to be copper in there, which is a wonderful source of nutrients. Then we've got the whole controversy of real vitamin C as opposed to ascorbic acid. And it took me a long time to realize, why are animals eating grass? Well, they're eating grass for a lot of reasons, but one of them is for the vitamin C. And probably one of the best sources of vitamin C beyond a diet. Again, the catch here is that everyone wants to know, well, what are some good foods for vitamin C? Well, actually, there's 14 times more vitamin C in grass than there is in oranges. That's good for people to know. There's 18 times more beta-carotene in grass than there is in carrots. That's a good thing to know. And so don't be afraid of grass-fed products. But here's the catch. The grass and these food products are only as good as the mineral composition in the soil.
That's right.
And you need to talk to the farmer and say, how are you feeding your soil? And it isn't just the minerals, it's the microbes. That's where the real crisis is in regenerative farming. And I'm sure you know this, that we're supposed to have 7 fungi for every bacteria. Well, now it's 1 to 1. On a commercial farm, there's an absolute devastation of the fungi. Well, that's a serious problem. The microbial structure of soil has changed. And again, it's because of all the chemicals. But the thing is, food is a very important source. Sauerkraut, great source of vitamin C. A cup of cabbage is 60 milligrams of real vitamin C. When you allow that to ferment with the natural yeast in the air, it becomes 600 milligrams of vitamin C. And Captain Cook knew that. He's the only mariner back in the age of sail that had no sailors die from scurvy.
Right.
And his genius, it's really clever the way he did it. He would serve the sauerkraut to the officers. And the seamen would walk by and they said, "What are you eating?" He said, "Well, this is special food for the officers." And they, "Well, we want that." "Oh, no, you don't want that." He would use car salesman. "You can't have that. It's too good for you." And he got all the seamen to say they wanted it. And then it's a very, very, very funny story about his genius. So beyond the food, we use supplements. And I think a really rich source of vitamin C is Innate Response, has a very high end of vitamin C. It really packs a punch. Ascorbic acid, you just got to let it go. And don't do the liposomal, don't do the IVs. It destroys ceruloplasmin is what it does. And people don't know that. And so then the third source is grass-fed beef liver. And in a healthy cow eating grass the way our ancestors' cows did, there's twice as much copper as there is iron in a healthy beef liver. Again, we've been trained to think of it as an iron organ. It's not.
We have.
Absolutely. And it stores copper, retinol, and iron. It's meant to store all three. And again, low copper diet's going to store a lot of iron. And that's the game that's been played for 60 years. We didn't know that game was being played. And so the beef liver that I grew up with, my mom was very insistent about beef liver every week, and it tasted yummy. Well, it doesn't taste so yummy now. Why? Because when I was born in 1952, so back then the cows were still eating grass. Now, 2021, they're eating grain, GMO grain, and it's got completely different composition. And so it doesn't taste right. So I have the pleasure of talking to over 6,500 people in consults in the last decade. And I have a list, 13 people who actually get excited about the fact they need to eat beef liver. Everybody else hates it. That's because they don't understand the importance of grass-fed nutrition.
Right. Well, one thing we do here at the foundation is we connect people with their local chapter leaders where they can find some of the best sourced meats and organ meats, which we know are so important. So I appreciate you're making an emphasis on that. Now, I want to ask you one more question before I ask my final question. So this is the penultimate question, and it is this, Morley. How do we lower our iron levels sorry, I didn't say that right. How do we lower our iron levels since you said that that's really critical as well?
Well, we're going to do two things. One, we're going to raise our bioavailable copper, and the general's going to take over, and it's going to allow the recycling system. It's a very, very important iron recycling system that provides 95% of our daily iron requirement. 24 of the 25 milligrams we need every day to make the next day's batch of red blood cells. To give the listeners a context, we make 2 million red blood cells every second.
Wow.
So multiply that times 60 times 24. It's a big number again. And so we need 25 milligrams of iron. And that comes from a recycling system that provides 24 of those 25 milligrams. And that can only happen when the general is in charge. And then the other thing we're going to do on a regular basis is we encourage people to do blood donations. And for women who are menopausal or men at any age can do quarterly blood donations. Women who are still cycling, we encourage them to do it at least once or twice a year in addition to their monthly blood loss. And then there's a whole series of chelators that people can use. There's iDetox, there's quercetin, there's IP6, there's a number of different products out there. But what we encourage people to do is have an understanding of their mineral composition before they start to really get deep into this. And we tend to use hair tests and a blood test. There's a test out there called the Full Monty Iron Panel. And all I did was cobble together existing tests into one that no one had ever designed it before, because it's looking at magnesium and zinc and copper and iron and vitamin A and D. And it's a fascinating array of variables, but it tells a very powerful story about what's going on inside someone's body. And it explains all. The reason we use the testing is not so much to diagnose anything, because we don't diagnose anything. We don't treat anything. What we're really doing is using the testing to validate the stress that people have been under, because the stress causes mineral loss, and the mineral loss causes mineral dysregulation. And all we do is say, so I was talking with a client yesterday, 67 years old. She had a car accident when she was in college. She's never been the same since. I said, did you ever go to see a chiropractor? She said, no. And then she had 3 other rear end accidents after that. And so we're the same age, but she's working from a lot of physical trauma that then became fibromyalgia, that then became all sorts of metabolic issues. And what does the body do when it's injured? It recruits hemoglobin. Why? Because it's carrying oxygen. Because the tissue wants to make energy to repair the tissue, right? If you don't have copper, you can't flip the oxygen and turn it into water. You can't make energy. And so the oxygen and the iron stick together and cause rust. And it's bingo bongo. That's the basis of most people's problems right there.
Well, thank you for doing I was going to say a deep dive, but I feel like we just scratched the surface. But thank you for taking us as far as you did, Morley, in our understanding of the need to balance our minerals and to take a look at the fact, you just blew my mind about the fact that there may not be disease after all, and that maybe we're looking at things through the wrong paradigm. So you've really opened our eyes, or at least my eyes, to this. So I appreciate that. I want to ask you now the question I often pose at the end. If the listener could do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do?
Stop listening to mainstream medicine. It's a very dangerous paradigm that it's not based on physiology. And the core of that thinking is based on Louis Pasteur. And people certainly have heard of the debates between Pasteur and Béchamp, particle versus field. But what a lot of people don't realize is that what Béchamp was really talking about was the energetic field, back to the 40 quadrillion mitochondria. He didn't know that. But he knew that the field of our body had an electric fence to it. And if you can't make energy, the electric fence doesn't work. And so Pasteur's job, just like Ansel Keys' job, just like Fauci's job, is to get people twisted and focus on the wrong thing and create this mesmerizing message around, oh, you got to worry about the particle. And we're just now coming out of our post-COVID stupor, realizing, there's more to the story. And we don't need to get into it, because I know that the whole thing that's been missing for the last 18 months is any discussion about a very big word called immunometabolism. Our immune system runs on energy. And why do we need energy? Because our immune system has intelligence. And you can't have intelligence if you don't have energy. And you can't have energy if you can't turn oxygen into water to release the energy molecules. So people need to really step back from the narrative that we've all been exposed to, because that's all it is. It's a story. And realize that there's profound insights in the literature. And we talk about them regularly with the root cause protocol and on the Magnesium advocacy group. And very grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation. Maybe if your listeners have questions, we can come back to it at some point. But what I've come to realize is it really builds on the principles that are so central to the Weston A. Price movement, but it takes it into a sharper focus around certain areas so that people realize why these nutrients are so important and how they work synergistically in our body. And I think that's really what is needed on this planet, is more awareness, awareness, A for retinol. We need more awareness so that people realize how important proper nutrition is to allowing the farm to rebuild, recycle, and make sure that we're getting that factory worker copper every day.
Well, this has been super inspiring, and I think it was one way to raise that awareness, as you're saying. So thank you for the conversation, Morley. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's great.
Our guest today was Morley Robbins. Visit his website, therootcauseprotocol.com. And I'm Hilda Labrada Gore. You can find me at holistichilda.com. I'm the host and producer of the show for the Weston A. Price Foundation. And for the transcript for this podcast episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. Menina77 says this, simply the best. This is my favorite podcast. I have a 2-acre farm and I do a lot of tasks on my farm while listening. My only complaint is that they don't release enough episodes. I want more. I love all the subjects on food, health, and freedom. What a well-rounded, open-minded, and really awesome podcast. I love Hilda's humor. Thank you, Menina. And her questions are so right on. She is a wonderful host. So many good things to say. If you want to learn and be uplifted at the same time, listen to this podcast. Menina, seriously, this is very encouraging. We all work really hard here to get the show out week after week. And don't forget that we have a new podcast app now. So you can go to your app store on your iOS device or on your Android, type in Wise Traditions Podcast and get the app. And I'm suggesting that because we may try to get additional content out there in the new year, and you'll be all good to go if you get that app. And please, each of you is welcome to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really does stoke our engine and keep us going strong. And thank you so much for listening. Stay well, my friend. Hasta pronto.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.